Okay, so Marcus, how are you feeling today?
I'm doing good today. Thank you for asking. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thank you for asking, and thank you for being a part of this interview. So, you have this amazingly adorable book that you've written. At least one of your books that I'm familiar with is A Very Beautiful Rainbow. Tell
Yes.
me about this book. What prompted you to write it? Did you write it for someone in particular? Tell me, tell me, tell me.
It's a cool story. It's my first book. It's my favorite book. I really love this one. I didn't really have a plan going in. It was me and my wife and her family were at, I think, an Office Max printing something. And they have like a kid table to draw pictures. I just sat down. I wasn't a kid, but I just sat down. I was bored. So I'm drawing and I just drew a rainbow. And I thought, you know what? Wouldn't it be cool to make a story about how the rainbow came to be what it was? And then the idea was there. We got home, and I think that same day, I think the rest of the story just kind of came together, and I made it about sharing. So this rainbow in the story, he lives in a world where there's no color except for him. Everything else is just, gray and boring. And he has all these beautiful colors. He's walking on a trail and he meets different people and they say, oh, I want to have just one color, and he shares at least one color, and at the end he's got no colors left and he's crying, and then tears kind of form something with the sunlight, and and he gets his colors back. And the lesson is, when you share with others, you get things back too. So it's good to share, make them happy, that makes you happy. And it kind of just came out, and I just like the message of it, the colors. Kids love it, adults love it. So I have a very fond spot for it. That's my first book. I've sold more than that than the other copies I've had, other books I've made. So it's kind of like a picture became a thought, became a story. And that's how it came to be what it is.
My goodness. So, was this your very first book? Was this your first time as an author, or had you
My
been
first time as
writing?
an author. Well, I mean, I've been writing, my whole life. Like I would make poems, but I never published anything before. This was my first, like, I'm an author. This is my book, my name on it, making copies on Amazon and different places. This was my first one. So that's why I think I got a special place in my heart for it.
Wow. And what's been the response for other people reading this book?
So there is a book fair called Word on the Street, and it's featured in Toronto every year. So September of 2019, I went and I had a booth set up. And I remember one lady came, this one experience, she came, she bought the book, and then she left, the day goes on. She comes back and she is like gushing about how, oh, this message is so good for the kids. I can't believe that someone is making these stories. And she was just blown away by it. And I would have kids walk past and like make their dad, hey, I want to get this book, because the rainbow character would draw them in. So I've gotten good responses. And then I know some kids through my wife at her daycare when she worked there, and they loved it. The parents loved it. So I've gotten good feedback from it. So I want to like think about, okay, what needs to be told to kids? But then the thing about when you teach them, you don't want to sound like you're preaching to them. You want it to feel like
Mhm.
it's a fun lesson, but they still learn something. So that's kind of like, what can I teach them in a fun and exciting way? So that's my thought for my next books, is teaching lessons, but in a fun way.
Very nice. And you said you got the inspiration to do this by sitting down to color. So are you also an artist?
It wasn't a pretty picture. I tried to find it. I know I have it, but I don't have it on me. But it wasn't a pretty rainbow. But just the act of drawing, I think my creative juices kind of got flowing, and I'm a much better writer than I am a drawer. So I don't draw. I'm a writer.
Now, would you say though that that could potentially be a lesson for others, is even if you don't have the innate talent or skill, is to just sit down and do it?
I would say that actually would make sense, because like I wasn't intending to write a book. I just wanted to be creative, and I wasn't good at the writing, but I'm like, well, I can tell this through a story format. So that's a good point. You might start off, you want to do this one, but it doesn't work out. Well, that might lead to something else. So at least give it a shot, because you might end up finding what you really like through that process.
That's a very cool insight. So you said you've been writing your whole life. How did that start? Did you have people in your life or family members that were inspirational in your storytelling journey?
Definitely. So I do have this book here. It's kind of beat up, but it's called The Napping House. So my dad would read to me all the time. He instilled a love of reading in me that I still have, and I think loving to read became, well, I want to write my own stories. And so like in class, I would always write, different stories, and I would always get good feedback. I remember, I think I was in elementary school. I made these poems like cats versus dogs, and like I would read them from the class, and they would all laugh at me and like the story. I've always liked to think up, I've got a vivid imagination, and I think that comes from loving reading as at a young age. So then you want to like take what's in your mind and somehow put it on paper. And I would just do that my whole life, just casually, just write poems, different things. But I never thought of, let me become an author, because I didn't think that you could. Like my very, like, I think, like, what, in kindergarten they say, what do you want to be? I want to be an author. But you realize that's probably not a good career because it's not really consistent. So I didn't really focus on it. But now I'm like, wait a minute. One day I'm like, I'm an author now. Like I did it. Like it was like a real, like, wait, I actually became what I wanted to be. And it's a cool feeling to know that someone can read something that you wrote and then get a feeling from it. It's nice to know you can touch somebody that way. So my whole life I've been writing and reading and loving it. So I think it just eventually became, what it is today.
Very nice. And so, what are some challenges you faced along this journey?
Challenges is writer's block. Like I wrote the Rainbow Story. I think it wasn't until a year that I made another book, just because you feel like you want to top it, and it really isn't about topping it. It's just about making a good story. And I
Mm.
think I realized, don't think too much. And then I think with my next book, my wife just said, make a story about apples and bananas. I'm like, okay. And then I made my next book, and it's a series of poems, and it's called Apples in My Backpack. And that poem is about a kid who has like healthy food popping up in his house. Doesn't know why. And it's because his family is hiding it to help him to eat better and replacing his junk food with healthy food. And so like when someone just says, I think it had to be her because I was in my head too much. She said, just
Mm.
write about this. I'm like, I wouldn't have picked that, but it did. So sometimes you just have to kind of get out of your head a little bit and have someone else help you out with the process too. And then I think my next book after that wasn't even like a year. It was called Balloons on Mars. And that one was just from me just, when I feel like I watch a lot of kid shows and cartoons to kind of get in touch with my younger side. And when I do that, I feel like I do better. When I'm in my
Mm.
adult head, I don't do too well with the writing. I got to get myself in a younger mode and I can kind of connect with it better.
So, what would be your advice to a budding author or writer in a situation where they're suffering with a creative block?
My advice is, if you have an idea for a book, you write it down, and it might sound dumb. Like I'll have an idea. I have a list of like just book ideas. I'll be thinking about, oh, what about this? So write it down at that moment, because maybe at that moment nothing will come out of it. But like I've had some that I've had written down, like maybe like a year later, a poem came out of it because I had the idea. So write down whatever thought you have and don't criticize it. Don't say that's too dumb. Well, that might lead to something else. Just as a writer, there's so much in our heads, and we try to filter, well, which one of those things will be good. The thing
Mm.
is, no one sees things the way you do. So you might think that's not a good idea. Some kid could love that idea. So write it down and come back to it. And then just don't make it about, well, what would I like? What would the kids like to read? Because they have a different mindset than we do. They're often not thinking about it on deeper levels. They just want to have a good, fun story. And when you think about it from that point, like step back out of it, just whatever idea you have, write it down and come back to it later, and maybe something will come out of it. But don't. I've had some times where I'm like, I had a good idea, didn't write it down, and now I can't remember what it was. And I wish I, because there's something could have been there, but so write it all
Mhm.
down and just come back to it later when you have a different, mindset about it.
So, would you say that your intention is to stay primarily a children's book author?
Yeah, I would say children's. Honestly, I feel like I can connect with kids more than I can connect with adults, just because I've kept myself in a young mindset. I just feel like with kids, it's a lot easier because they just want a fun story. Adults might want like drama, they might want suspense. And I'm like, well, that's not fun to me. I like just having a lesson about sharing, or a lesson about uh without any point to it, just because it's a nice story. So I feel like with kids books, that's been my focus. I've had some people say, "Oh, you should write." They tried to get me to write an adult book. I'm like, I said, "No, that's not my lane. I know my lane, I'm gonna stick with it." And that's another thing too, is people will give you suggestions about where to go, but if it's not your lane, you're not gonna be able to connect and make a good story. So if you find your lane, stick with it. And you can branch out if you want to, but like if you know your goal, just stick in that direction. And if you know what works for you, then keep going towards that. And that way you'll have more success instead of trying to force it if it's not really gonna be what you're gonna enjoy doing.
So it's interesting that you had this idea come to you as you were just out and about, and you sat down and you put pen to paper and started drawing. But you say it's important to find your lane. Do you think that's how you found your lane, or you found your lane early on? Like what was the one main thing that happened for you that made you say, "Yep, that I'm on the right track"?
I think that's how I found my lane because I mean, like I was a grown man sitting at a kid's table drawing pictures, but I've always had, I think, that inside of me to make something that young people would like. But until I sat down and got involved in that process, I didn't really understand it. So your direction and where you want to go with your business or if you're writing something, it's going to be there. But until you actually sit down and try to get involved with it, you may not find it. So, like, maybe you just start doodling. You're not a good artist. You start doodling, and then maybe that doodle becomes a character for a book that you end up getting, off the ground. Or maybe you try to write a book, but maybe I'm not a writer, so you draw it out instead. So I think just trying to be creative. Um,
Mhm.
and then as you do that, you find out, well, I can't emote myself in this way, but maybe this is better. You eventually find how you can express yourself in a good way. So I think just thinking of different ways, like try to draw, try to write, try to sing, play an instrument, and then whatever you aren't good at, you'll figure it out real quick. And then you say, well, what am I good at? And then you'll find it and you can just, develop and once you find that area.
And so, of course, we've connected because of Mom and Pop Gems, and their mission is to bring recognition to entrepreneurs. So you're an author, but you're also an entrepreneur. How do you juggle those two personality pieces of who you are, being a writer, an author, and an entrepreneur?
I kind of rolled it into one because, my love of writing and reading, and I made, my book. And so then that spun off into someone said, oh, well, you've got a good like narrating voice. And I never thought about that. So then I signed up to become a freelance narrator. And then I'm reading these books, and some of them had a lot of grammatical errors in them. So that turned me into like a proofreader. So I made my website, see Marcus Wright. And so what I have my books there, and I can also offer my narration and my proofreading services. And so I think my lane is just like books, either making them or reading them or editing them or proofreading. And that's how I got in touch with Cindy at Mom and Pop. I had a freelance profile on Upwork, and it was about like just recording things and editing things. And then she reached out and said, hey, you've got these skills. And so now that, I remember doing your story and writing your story and making that. And that's like a creative process because I took your interview and made a story out of it. So like that goes back to me, my imagination and something coming out from me onto paper. So really everything that I do, it's what I like to do. And so I think if what you're marketing is what you like to do, you'll find ways to get something out of it. I
And
feel like if
so,
I
do you?
didn't like writing, if I didn't like it, but I was forcing it, I wouldn't try so hard to keep it
Mhm.
going. And eventually it probably would just fizzle out. But because I like it so much, I enjoy it. It's easy for me to keep it going.
It's so important. I agree with you to find the thing that you enjoy doing. And then when you make that connection to monetize it, well, then there you go. You have an entrepreneur journey in front of you. But what about traditional training or expertise or certification or anything like that? Can you give us an understanding of what your background is in that regard for someone who's potentially looking to pursue being an author or a writer?
Well, I didn't really take any training to be an author. I think I have learned along the way about like the publishing process, and because me, I'm self-published. So I found different ways to do that. I will say, as far as being an author, what's really going to make you stand out is understanding how to write well. And so I did take a proofreading course, that just helps you to see like grammar and things, because that's the one thing. You can have a good story, but people will focus on the mistakes if it's not written well, if there's errors. And I know for me, when I see, companies, and they have these errors, I'm like, who proofread that for you? And so I think the main thing is making it look professional is the main thing. So you can take courses on how to format. And I think also too, know your platform. Each
Mhm.
platform will have its own requirements for what your book should look like. And you want to know, if I'm going to be on this platform, how do I make it look good on this platform? So do your research. I would look up, I know Amazon KDP is a good place to publish your books, but they give you guidelines on what they expect your books to look like. And you can, fine tune it to make it look the way you want it to look professional. There's also another website called Lulu, and they will look different from Amazon. So you can't really take one and plug it into another. You got to kind of market it and format it for the other website. So I think do your research, find out what platform you want to be on, and figure out what do they require from me. You can do some research, but I know that you can take like courses. I just feel like for me being an author, it all came from just my love for writing as a young person. And I think, throughout school, I love language arts. And so I always did well in that subject. So I think that was my training, was just school itself. And then getting out of school, it was just finding, okay, what do I want to express? And then how do I express that? So I feel like if you want training, you can look for that. But if it's in you, you may just need to be fine-tuned as far as how it looks, but as far as the process, I don't even know if that can really be taught, how to be an author. I think how
Right.
to become how to publish your books might be more, but how to be an author, that's really got to come from, I think, from inside you first, and I think the rest will follow.
Interesting. As an editor, writer, and proofreader, I certainly agree with you in that it's important to just put yourself out there. And then, as you say, to fine tune your skills within, but you got to do it first, right? So I wonder if this is also true for you, that you can't unsee errors, whether you're reading another person's client's work or even just out and about in the world. Do you find that that's the case as well, that you can't
The
unsee
proofreading
mistakes?
thing, it does not go off. So I feel like I will find the area if I'm not looking for it. I just think my brain is wired. Things need to be written the right way. And if they're not, I notice it. And so there's been people, I'm like, okay, you know what? Like I've seen like social media posts. I'm like, "Ah, you just need someone to proofread your post for you. Like, can I do that for you, please?" So it doesn't turn off. I think that that adds into what I do, is because like every day I'm correcting things anyway. Why not get paid for it? Because I'm always doing it in my mind, So I think I'm with you. It doesn't get turned off. I see them all.
So is that a way that you find clients though? Do you reach out to people when you find an error on a website or social media, and reach out, and what do you say to them?
Yes, I do. Are you there? I kind of
Yeah.
lagged a little bit.
Yep, still
Okay.
here.
So the first time it happened, so I was a narrator manuscript and I'm reading it,
Mhm.
and it was almost unreadable. I was like, no, no, no. So I read it. I'm like, okay, look, sir, your book is good, but if you can have it look more professional, people will leave better reviews on that book when they read it. And that's going to end up being better for you. So why don't you pay me X amount to just proofread this book, and then I'll narrate it for you as well. And he said, sure. And then I mean, this was a couple of years ago. I've got 2 clients that I continuously work on editing their books for them, just from asking them, hey, I think this needs to be done better. Can I do it for you? So I just from just asking people directly, I've gotten a lot of regular clients that way.
Very cool. So now, outside of being an author and a writer, what are some hobbies that you enjoy?
Well, I enjoy it with my family. I'm married, and me and her mom and her brother, my family, we spend time together. And I love reading. I still love reading. So I still do that. I like to be outside. I play basketball, in my spare time, listen to music. I just like having connections with people. So, if it's a Zoom call or a phone call or texting, I'm always talking to somebody. And I think being in tune with a lot of my friends, they have younger kids that I'm around, and like keeping my ear on, okay, what, do kids like these days, and what could I maybe put in my book that would make them, and I've got my fan club. My biggest fan club is actually my five, let's see, my 5 cousins. They are my biggest fans. So they live in another state, and I haven't been around them in person a whole lot. But so my aunt, bought them, my books. And so one day I do a FaceTime, And she's like, "You know who this is? He wrote your book for you." And they said, "No, he wrote the book." And they were so like, I was like I'm their favorite author. I think,
Nice.
and I read my books for them and kind of act them out. I think just connecting with kids in that way has kept me fresh, and I love to do that. So family, friends, and reading.
Very
Those are my
cool. So,
hobbies.
tell me who some of your favorite authors are. Who inspires you?
So I've always got inspiration actually from Dr. Seuss. He's like my number one because there's been times when he actually has made up words that we use today just because he wanted it to rhyme. And so like creatively, that's like my number one. Other authors I've liked over the years, I do like to read books like Mark Twain. I do like, his style. I know there's another author that I've had in my mind, but nothing comes to me right now. But as far as who inspires me, definitely Dr. Seuss. Oh, as far as poems, Shel Silverstein.
Okay.
I do like him because I like the quirkiness of some of his poems. Like you wouldn't think that would be a good topic for a poem, but he makes it fun and crazy. So I do feel like when I was younger, I was more into like poetry and making poems. I think that's why the Dr. Seuss kind of stuck out with me. But I've read other books who I did like. I like Lemony Snicket because he wrote the Unfortunate Events series, and I loved that growing up. So trying to think who else did I have like all their books. Definitely Lemony Snicket. Yeah, I think those would be the ones that for me are the main standouts. Is those trying to say I got my books right here. I'm trying to think who else, but that's probably the. Oh, you know I've liked Jules Verne. I've
Hmm,
been getting into some older sci-fi
okay.
books. So
Nice. So, can
um
we expect to see some sci-fi in any
you know
upcoming
what?
stories?
Yes, you can. So I did mention before that I'm sticking to kids books, but I do actually have a sci-fi kind of like a fiction book, and it has to do with clones. So it's kind of been in my brain for like maybe 3 years, and so I haven't really had time to really flesh it out. I think I'm almost done with it. So yes, I do think there's a sci-fi book coming, so stay tuned for that. It'll be on my
Okay.
site whenever it does come out.
Now, as an entrepreneur, what would you say has been your biggest obstacle that you've had to overcome, and how did you overcome it?
The biggest obstacle is finding clients. You might find one client and it's a one-time project, but then you want to find that recurring client base. And so what I've done is to overcome that. If I've worked with someone in the past, I I keep emailing them every like few months. Hey, how are you? Do you have anything else in process? And there's one person I worked with him maybe 2 years ago, had a couple of things, and then nothing for a couple of years. I recently reached back out, and like now for the past like 3 or 4 months, I've been doing things for him. So never lose your contacts and always maintain good relationships as far as working wise. Like meet your deadlines on time, be honest, because if people like your work, you can get them to, hire you again. But if you like did a bad job and you didn't communicate well with them, and you ask them, hey, can I? They're not even going to read your email. They might just put it on delete. So I think to overcome having a hard time finding clients, look back at your old clients. And sometimes they might have work that they forgot about you. Hey, I'm here. I'm still doing this. Oh, you are? And they, just keep on reaching back to maybe past clients. And as far as
Very
new
cool.
clients, you can make profiles on like Fiverr and Upwork, other places to kind of keep your name out there for people that are looking for work still or for
That
freelancers still.
that is great. All great advice for someone starting out, and obviously for longtime entrepreneurs, even myself. Is there any other inspiration that you want to give to an entrepreneur or a writer or an author or someone aspires to do children's books?
I think as a writer, it's important actually to keep reading. If you I know I found for me, when I've had writer's block, when I just sat down and read a book, it triggered something in me that wanted to write myself again. So to be a good writer, you have to also be an avid reader. I don't care what it is, just always read something because that will keep your mind in that gear. If you stop reading, you're going to stop writing. And that's been true for me. So I would say if you want to be an author, keep reading. And if you write kids books, read other kids books, not to match their style, but to see what's been done, because you want to make sure that what you write hasn't really been done before and it's unique to have your own lane. Like if there is a million books about this topic and you write the million and first book. What are you going to get from that? But if your book has a different angle on something, that's your lane, that's your niche. So keep reading. And I would also say the one last thing is don't expect your first draft to be your last draft. The first time you write something, that's not gonna be the final copy. Expect to say, why did I even write this down? Mark it off because that's part of the process. Don't expect to be perfect on the first try. Write it out and then go back and intend that I'm gonna make different changes. And then just keep changing until you get, what you are. The end result is gonna be what you like. But if you feel like, well, I wrote it out, and also think a big at taking feedback too. Some kid, you might love this part. I've had that happen to me. I love this part. Some kid was like, yeah, that wasn't funny. So if the kid says it's not funny, then take it out. Even if I like that part, well, I'm writing it for the kids. So find your audience and get feedback directly from your audience would be a good thing too. Like if I'm writing a book for kids, I would want my feedback coming from people that aren't kids or that
Mhm.
don't have kids. So get relevant feedback. I would say relevant feedback, accept criticism, expect to make mistakes, and you want to be a good writer, then be an avid reader.
Those are all great points, great advice, Marcus. Thank you so much for that. Now, where can people find more about you, your services, and your book?
Yeah, so everything is all wrapped up neatly on my website. It's c-marcus-wright at jimdosite.com. I think that's what it is. And my Instagram is cmarcuswright. And
Very
that's
cool.
where all my stuff is at. I think a link to my Instagram is even on the website too. So really the website has everything.
Very cool. Well, we'll make sure that we add all of that in the notes so that people can reach out to you. Is there absolutely anything else that you want to share?
I think that really covers it. I would just say if you love something, you can find a way to make money from it. If you think outside the box and you can find a way to monetize what you love. And that way you're getting money from it, but you also love it. So like the love of it kind of comes first and the money kind of comes later. But also if you have an idea, go for it. Don't hold back. Don't think that you can't do it because if you think hard enough, you actually can make any idea work. So if you have an idea, run for it. And if you have to make another shift, you will, but just at least start running and you'll end up somewhere good at the end.
Very, very cool. Again, Marcus, thank you so much for
Uh,
sharing your time and your knowledge and expertise with the Mom and Pop Gems audience. I appreciate you.
Thanks for having me. I thank you so much.